So far we looked at analyzing the transactions and posting the transactions to the journal and then posting the transactions to the ledger. And remember, posting to the journal and the ledger is essentially the same thing. The only difference is that the ledger groups the transactions by account. So if we look back at our journal, you see we have all these accounts on different lines. And if you actually wanted to calculate the cash account, you'd have to go through and pull out this number, you'd have to pull out this number, and pull out that number. What a ledger does is summarizes all these various transactions under one account. So if we go over to our ledger, you see all you have to do is go to the cash account, and all the transactions that we posted into our journal are summarized here for us. Okay, let me just remove these numbers here quickly. Okay, so now that we've done that, what we need to do is balance our accounts, because the whole point of accounting is to see what numbers remain after we've performed all of our transactions. And we use our ledger to do that because the ledger provides a summary of each account. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to add up the left side, all the numbers on the left. We're going to add up all the numbers on the right. We're going to subtract the two numbers, and we're going to see what the balance is. Now, one thing I want to mention to you is that we have something called a normal balance. We have something called a normal balance. For accounts, whichever side of the account increases it, whichever side of the account increases it, we say that that is the normal balance of the account. Okay, what do I mean? Let's go back to our Word document. If we look at our Word document, we see that for assets, debits increase our assets. Debits increase our assets. So that means that assets have what we call a normal debit balance. That means we would expect that after all of our transactions have been posted to the ledger, a number is going to remain on the left side or the debit side of all of my asset accounts. Now, it doesn't always happen, and you'll see shortly, and I'll explain why, but normally we would expect to see a debit balance or a number, a remaining number on the left side of the asset account. Liabilities are increased by a credit, so we would expect to see a normal credit balance. So after you add up the left side and you add up the right side and you subtract the two, you should expect to see a balance remaining on the right side of a liability account. And the same goes for the other. Stockholders' equity has a normal credit balance. Dividends has a normal debit balance. Revenues has a normal credit balance. And expenses have a normal debit balance. Okay? So, now that we've talked about that, let's go and balance our accounts. So here's my ledger. What I'm going to do is add up everything on the right, subtract it from the left, and subtract it from the right. So here for my prepaid insurance, I only have one number on the left side, and that automatically becomes my balance. And we know that prepaid insurance is an asset. And remember what I said about normal debit balance. About assets. They have a normal debit balance, which is on the left side. I'm going to skip cash for now. Let's do, and notice that I put these fancy lines to show that I balanced my account. It has one line at the top and two lines beneath the number. Okay? Alright, let's go to prepaid rent. We're going to do the same thing here. If I can just find my lines. There we go. So there's only one number on the left side, which is 800. No numbers on the right. So the balance of this account is 800. Office equipment, it's going to be a similar deal. We have 1800 on the left, 0 on the right. So the balance of this account is going to be 1800. Right, and I'm just going to go through and do this for all of my accounts. Miscellaneous expenses is going to be 180. unearned rent, it has a balance on the right side, which is the credit side. So I'm going to, and it has nothing on the left side. So the balance of this account is going to be your 360. Let's align this one. All right, accounts payable now. We have two different numbers. We have one on the left and one on the right. So we subtract the two. And when we subtract the two, the bigger side is the right side, correct? So the remaining balance is going to be on the right side. So we have equals 1800 minus my 900, and I have a balance of 900 on the credit side. Again, I subtracted my 900 from my 1800, and because the credit side was bigger, the balance is on the credit side. So this account, after these two transactions, has $900 remaining in it, and it's on the credit side. Okay. So that's for executive company. My accounts payable. This one is going to have 400 on the debit side. Now this is a liability account. This is a liability account, but it has an amount on the debit side, which is not normal. We don't consider that to be a normal balance for this account. And I'll explain to you why. The reason is that we kind of picked up these transactions from chapter 2, and we did not take into account the transactions that occurred from chapter 1. So this account probably had a balance in it from chapter 1 that we did not account for here. And we'll talk about that as we go on in further chapters, as we get into chapter 3. And even when we do some practice problems for chapter 2, we might also look at that. But again, if there is a balance that came over from the previous year, we do have to include it into this account. So, and here's a good example. These balances that we're doing now, like the $2,400 for prepaid insurance, the $800 for prepaid rent, the $1,800 for office equipment, these are the ending balances for this year, and those are going to become the beginning balances next year. So next year, when you start doing your accounts for prepaid insurance, you're going to start off with $2,400 in that account. It does not go away. Okay? So this accounts payable probably had a balance from chapter 1, which we did not include here. And that's why it has a debit balance. But normally, it should have a credit balance. Because remember, whichever side, debit or credit, increases the account, that's where the normal balance is. And this is a liability, which we know liabilities are increased by credits. Okay? Now, since we did that, I can go back up and do the cash. So the cash, I already know, is going to have a credit balance. That means we spent too much cash. But again, that's not normal. The reason it has a credit balance is because we did not take into consideration some number that existed in this account from chapter 1. Okay? So now I'm going to add up my left side. I'm going to minus my right side. And it has negative 3635. Alright, so all these accounts are balanced. Let's go over to the next page and balance these ones. So this has two numbers on the left side, no numbers on the right side. I'm just going to add up these two numbers. And that's my balance. Fees earned. It has numbers only on the right side. I'm going to add up these numbers. And I'm just going to go through and add up the numbers for all my accounts. So accounts receivable, I have two numbers on the left and one number on the right. So I am going to add up all the numbers on the left. So I'm going to do the sum of these two numbers. And I'm going to subtract the number on the right. Supplies only has one number. Let me align these just so it looks presentable. Utilities, I'm going to add these two numbers. So we get a balance of 535. Put my lines. And last but not least, my dividends. There's only one number in there. Okay, so now all my accounts are balanced. All right. Now that I've done that, the next step that I'm going to do is called a trial balance. A trial balance. And all your trial balance is, it's a listing. Your trial balance is a listing of all your accounts and their balances. So again, your trial balance is a listing of all your accounts and their balances. So let's go over to a new tab. I'm going to call this tab Trial Balance. And I'm going to put here account name. And I'm going to put debit and credit. Okay. So right now, I'm not going to do this in any particular order. When we start getting into chapter 4, where we start looking at doing the full accounting cycle, we will have to put these accounts in proper order. And I'll explain to you what that order is. But for now, I just want you to know that you have to list out all the accounts and their balances. So I'm going to start with prepaid insurance, which has a balance of $2,400 on the debit side. So I'm going to come to my trial balance. I'm going to put prepaid insurance, $2,400 on the debit side. And let me just include a line here that says, I'm looking to merge these, but I can never find it. Here we go, merge cells. So trial balance. And I'm going to center it. All right, so that's my prepaid insurance. My cash has 3635 on the credit side. Now we don't put the negative number, okay? So I'm actually going to just type 3635. The fact that it's on the credit side and cash usually has a debit balance means that it's negative, but we don't have to put the negative sign. Okay, the fact that it's a credit, again, tells me that it's negative cash. So we have prepaid rent, $800. We have unearned rent, $360 on the credit side. We have office equipment, $1,800 on the debit side. All right. Accounts payable, executive supply, $900. On the credit side. Miscellaneous expense, $180 on the debit side. Oops. Accounts payable, $400 on the credit side. On the debit side, sorry. Wages expense, $21.50, debit side. We have fees earned, $8,840 on the credit side. Accounts receivable, $22.20 on the debit side. We have supplies, $14.50 on the debit side. Utilities expense, $5.35 on the debit side. And we have dividends, $1,800 on the debit side. Now, the trial balance, the whole point of it is to make sure that everything balances. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add everything in our debit column, then we're going to add everything in our credit column. So I'm going to do equals the sum of everything in my debit column. Then I'm going to do equals the sum of everything in my credit column. And they balance. Okay? And the reason is that for every debit, I made a credit. All right? So, voila. All right? So, we've analyzed our transactions. We see our transactions here that we've looked at. Then we posted them to our journal, which is our original book of entry for our records. We posted them to the ledger, which in this class, we use T accounts to represent our ledger. We balanced our accounts, and then we prepared our trial balance. So, now that we've done our trial balance, it balanced. I suspect that sometimes you might do your trial balance and it will not balance. Hopefully that will not be the case, but it can happen. So I'm actually going to read off some of the errors that can occur, why your trial balance may not balance. And these can be found if you're using the Warren, Reeve, and Duchak book, 12th edition. It's on page 71. If you're not using that textbook, it's okay. Again, I'm going to read them off, and you can feel free to pause and re-listen to the lecture so that you hear the errors that can occur. Okay? So the first one is if the difference between the debit and the credit column, so we have our debit and we have our credit column, if the difference totals 10, 100, or 1,000, an error in addition may have occurred. So in this case, you want to re-add the trial balance column totals. If the error still exists, then you want to go back to your ledger and re-add your balances in each account. Okay? Number 2, if the difference between the debit and credit columns, the totals between the debit and credit columns can evenly divide by 2, then the error may be due to entering a debit as a credit balance or vice versa. For example, if these two numbers are different and the amount of the difference can evenly divide by 2, so let's say it came out to be a difference of $26. 26 can evenly divide by 2. All right, that means that you've entered a debit balance as a credit, so maybe $2,400 should have been here, or vice versa. So maybe you had a credit, such as this $36.35, which should have been entered as a debit. All right. So in this case, you want to review the trial balance for account balances of 1/2 the difference that may have been entered in the wrong column. Here's an example. If the debit column total is 20640. So let's say this total came out to be 20640. And the credit column total is 20236. All right. So those are different. They don't add up. Let's see what the difference is. So let's subtract these. It comes out to 404. And we know that 404 can evenly divide by 2. Because if we divide this equals this divided by 2, we get 202. All right. So the difference may be due to a credit account balance of 202 that was entered on the debit side. So it's saying that since there's 202 is the number that we get when we divide the 404 by 2, there might be something on the debit side in this number that should have been over here in the amount of 202. Okay, so that's another error. And again, hopefully you won't have errors if you do everything correctly, but you can always check if something happens. Now, if the difference between the debit and credit column totals is evenly divisible by 9, so it can be divided by 9, trace the account balances back to the ledger to see if an account balance was incorrectly copied from the ledger. So it's telling you if the difference between the two numbers, the debit and the credit, can be divided by 9 evenly, so there's no remaining number, all right? You want to check all of these numbers back to your ledger. So you're going to come back to the ledger, you're going to check every single one, and make sure that you entered them into your trial balance correctly. Okay? There are two common types of copying errors, which are transpositions and slides. Transpositions and slides. A transposition occurs when the order of the digits is copied incorrectly. For example, if your account had a balance of 542 and you wrote it in your trial balance as 452 or 524, that's called transposition. In a slide, the entire number is copied incorrectly, one or more spaces to the right or left. For example, if you had 542 in your ledger, let's say one of these accounts was 542, but in the trial balance, you write it as $54.20 or $5,420. That's what we call a slide. Okay? So you just want to go back to your ledger for either a transposition or a slide and make sure that you copied all your numbers correctly. That's if the difference between these two numbers can be divided by 9 evenly. All right? Now, if the difference between the debit and the credit column totals is not evenly divisible by 2 or 9, which we described before, you just want to review the ledger to see if an account balance in the amount of the error has been omitted from the trial balance. Okay, so for example, let's say the difference between these two numbers came up to be 540. Maybe you forgot to include an account from the ledger in your trial balance for the amount of 540. So you just want to review your ledger and make sure you actually brought over all the accounts that have balances. All right. If that doesn't solve it, then you want to go back to your journal. You're going to go all the way back to your journal and make sure that you posted all of these numbers to your ledger. So make sure all of these numbers from your journal have been posted to your ledger. And see if there's anything that is missing. All right. Lastly, if the error is not discovered by any of the steps that were just described, you must redo your entire accounting process. You have to go back and reanalyze the transactions, redo your journal, redo your ledger, balance the accounts, and then redo your trial balance. Okay? So those are some errors that affect the trial balance. Now, there's some errors that can occur. Which do not affect the trial balance. So what do I mean? You can post entries to the wrong account and your trial balance is still going to balance. For example, office equipment. If I had posted this 1800, let's say I make that 0, and I put 1800 in my supplies account instead. Okay? So I put 1800 in my supplies account instead. And let me re-add this balance. So now my office equipment becomes 0. So I'm going to go to my trial balance. My office equipment becomes 0. And my supplies becomes $32.50. So my supplies becomes $32.50. My trial balance still balances. But this is incorrect because that $1,800 transaction, if I look back somewhere here, involved purchasing equipment. So let's look for it. So here, number 4, it says Net Solutions purchased some equipment, $1,800. But we put it in our supplies account. That's not correct. It's not supplies. It's equipment. It belongs in the equipment column. But because we did a debit and we did a credit, our trial balance is still going to balance. So that's a type of error that can occur. Okay? So really what you want to do is always just analyze the transactions and be very careful when you are posting them to your journal and to your T account. Okay, so that concludes all that we're going to look at for chapter 2. And of course, you are free to ask me any questions that you have. Thank you.